Could Kate Middleton's fairy tale marriage really be over? Could William, the future king, truly walk away from the woman the world has long adored, all because of a verdict handed down by his own father? In the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, whispers of betrayal, heartbreak, and shocking declarations are echoing through corridors that have seen centuries of royal history. Today, nothing feels sacred anymore. The royal image of unity, of duty, of love under scrutiny is crumbling. And at the center of this storm is Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, in tears, facing a truth that no crown or title could have prepared her for. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine for a moment the weight of being the subject of global fascination. Every smile, every gesture, every glance is dissected by millions. Every private conversation might one day become a public headline. Now, layer on the unimaginable, the person you vowed to share your life with, your partner, your confidant, your love, is not only reconsidering that bond, but doing so after an authoritative decree from the reigning monarch, declaring you unfit for the role you were preparing for your entire life. How do you even begin to process that? How does one carry on when the very foundation of their life is shaken by words that echo through history as if scripted for a tragedy? The drama starts, as it often does, behind closed doors. While the public saw a poised, elegant Kate Middleton walking gracefully at state functions, meeting world leaders, and hosting charity events with calm sophistication, the palace corridors were a very different theater. Inside, tension simmered. William, long admired for his steadiness and dedication to duty, was caught between his heart and the responsibilities imposed upon him since birth. And Charles, now the king, a man whose own life had been shadowed by scandal, marital strain, and a relentless public gaze, made a decision that few expected, but perhaps everyone feared. In a decisive and dramatic move, Charles reportedly declared Kate unfit to be queen, a statement that struck at the very core of her life and role. What does unfit to be queen even mean? Is it a reflection of capability, personality, politics, or merely perception? Royal sources whisper that the declaration was less about her public persona and more about private judgments made over years of scrutiny, observation, and expectation. And once Charles made his stance clear to William, the future king was faced with a choice that would alter not only his life, but the course of the monarchy itself. Should he defend his wife, risk discord with his father, and potentially fracture the public's trust? Or should he follow protocol, align with the reigning king's judgment, and make a decision that no one, perhaps even he, wanted to make? The tension was unbearable. Kate's personal life, normally shielded with careful discretion, became a pressure cooker. Emotional confidants have described scenes of private anguish, quiet tears, long nights pacing her residence, whispered phone calls to advisors, and moments of sheer disbelief. The woman who had been the picture of composure at every public engagement was now facing an existential crisis, one that required far more than poise. It required resilience, strategy, and perhaps a confrontation with truths she had never anticipated. Could someone who appeared so steady in public truly withstand the storm brewing behind palace walls? The story extends beyond the personal to the public, the political, and the symbolic. Monarchies are not merely family dramas. They are institutions, symbols of continuity, and embodiments of tradition. Every decision resonates not only with those inside the palace, but with the nation and the world. A divorce between the future king and his queen would be unprecedented in modern history, and the consequences are staggering. How does the monarchy survive the fallout? How do advisors manage the optics? What does this mean for the young heirs watching from the sidelines, the children who embody the legacy of centuries? The timing is critical. In recent months, Charles has been asserting his authority in ways that some historians call bold and others controversial. Reports suggest that he has quietly evaluated not only Kate's suitability for queenship, but also William's readiness to act independently, unshackled by marital loyalty when the fate of the crown is at stake. These layers of palace intrigue, power dynamics, and personal judgment have combined to create a scenario few could have imagined. A marriage under public observation, teetering on the edge of collapse, where private emotions and institutional imperatives collide in the harshest of lights. You may be asking yourself, why now? Why would this moment, after years of seemingly stable appearances, come to a breaking point? Sources suggest that the pressure had been mounting quietly, almost invisibly. Small disagreements over protocol, subtle differences in opinion about public engagements, contrasting visions for charitable projects, and perhaps most significantly, an undercurrent of tension between Kate and Charles, all contributed to an atmosphere ripe for conflict. One particular meeting reportedly escalated the situation. Charles, flanked by a handful of trusted advisors, delivered his verdict on Kate's capacity to serve as queen. William, caught between duty and love, had to respond immediately, and the decision he made shocked even those closest to him. For Kate, the emotional impact was profound. Friends describe her devastation not just as sadness over a marriage ending, but as an existential upheaval, the unraveling of a life she had meticulously built. She had invested years cultivating her role as a modern, capable, and respected figure within the royal family. She had been praised for her poise, her intelligence, her charitable endeavors, and her ability to connect with the public. And yet, the words of the king, the very figure who determines the future of the monarchy, challenged every accomplishment and intention she had ever had. In an instant, the narrative of her life shifted from admiration to scrutiny, from triumph to uncertainty. Meanwhile, William's response was equally complicated. The man who had been groomed for leadership, taught to value duty above all else, suddenly found himself in a moral and emotional quandary. Defending his wife could mean confronting his father, challenging the authority of the king, and risking public scandal. Following the king's directive could preserve stability, but at the cost of his marriage and the woman he loves. Observers report that the decision-making process was agonizing, fraught with sleepless nights and confiding conversations with advisors and friends. Ultimately, the choice he made was decisive, but the repercussions would ripple far beyond his immediate family. The drama was not contained to palace walls. Within hours of the decision, rumors began to circulate in the press. Tabloids and international media outlets quickly picked up on the story, spinning narratives that were sometimes factual, sometimes speculative, and always sensational. Social media erupted with commentary, support, criticism, and conspiracy theories. Public opinion split between sympathy for Kate, condemnation of William, and intrigue over Charles's motivations. Analysts debated endlessly over whether this was a personal decision, a political strategy, or a calculated move to secure the monarchy's future. The palace, traditionally insular and tightly controlled, now faced a public relations crisis of monumental proportions. And yet, amid the chaos, the most shocking details remained hidden. Leaks, anonymous sources, and insiders hinted at layers of complexity that the public could barely imagine. There were secret letters, private conversations, and confidential assessments of Kate's character and temperament. Some insiders claimed that she had been blindsided by elements she had never anticipated, criticism she had never been made aware of, judgments based on unseen criteria, and expectations that seemed contradictory and impossible to meet. The palace, it seemed, had become a labyrinth of power, secrecy, and subtle manipulation, and Kate was caught at its center. For viewers, the story raises immediate questions. Could anyone survive such an ordeal? How do you navigate love, duty, family, and public scrutiny when the stakes are so high? And perhaps most provocatively, what does this tell us about the modern monarchy, the role of tradition, and the human cost of royal duty? As we explore this dramatic saga, we will uncover hidden alliances, betrayals, and revelations that challenge everything we thought we knew about one of the world's most famous families. By the end of this story, the truth about Kate's future as queen will shock everyone, including the royal family themselves. Secrets that have been guarded for decades are about to be exposed. Choices made in hushed rooms, whispered in confidence, will come to define the destiny of a monarchy. And the woman who once seemed untouchable, flawless, and composed will reveal a side the world has never seen. Vulnerable, determined, and facing the storm head-on. Could the fairy tale marriage of William and Kate really be fracturing behind the palace walls? For years, The world watched their relationship unfold like a carefully scripted romance. Charming engagements, picturesque walks in gardens, elegant public appearances, and an image of devotion that seemed unshakable. But as with all fairy tales, appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the polished exterior of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's life, tensions had been quietly simmering, small cracks forming in the foundation that the public had assumed was unbreakable. The story begins, as most dramatic tales do, in the shadows. Observers close to the royal family report that the first signs of strain appeared subtly. A slightly tense smile here, a fleeting argument whispered behind closed doors there, moments of disconnect that no camera lens could capture. At first, these were dismissed as normal marital disagreements. After all, William and Kate are two people under extraordinary pressure. Every move they make is scrutinized, every word analyzed, and every choice critiqued. But the cracks grew more pronounced over time, and insiders began to whisper that something deeper was brewing. One of the earliest, most telling signs came during a high-profile charity gala. Kate, in a stunning gown and radiant as ever, was photographed walking slightly behind William, her smile strained. Onlookers noted that William's attention seemed elsewhere, his expression distant, almost preoccupied. To the casual observer, this might have seemed inconsequential. But for palace insiders, this moment was emblematic of a growing distance. Kate's charm and grace could no longer bridge the subtle but increasingly significant emotional gap between her and her husband. She was beginning to feel isolated, even in moments of public adoration. The sources describe private conversations between the couple becoming tense, punctuated by misunderstandings and frustration. Kate, known for her intellect and calm demeanor, reportedly struggled to reconcile the demands of public life with the personal desire for authenticity and connection. William, meanwhile, was facing pressures of his own: the legacy of a monarchy in transition, the weight of a future kingship, and the expectations of his father, Charles. The intersection of personal desire and public duty created a pressure cooker environment, one that left both parties emotionally vulnerable. Kate's friends recall that she began confiding in them about her growing sense of alienation. She felt misunderstood, judged not only by the public, but by the very institution that should have been her support system. These revelations, while not public at the time, paint a picture of a woman navigating the treacherous waters of royalty while trying to maintain her sense of self. She was caught between the image of perfection that the world expected and the reality of a marriage under unprecedented scrutiny. Adding to the tension was the inevitable comparison with Charles's own tumultuous history. William, acutely aware of his father's struggles with marriage and public perception, reportedly feared repeating similar mistakes. This fear sometimes manifested as emotional distance, as William attempted to shield both himself and Kate from potential pitfalls. Ironically, this protective instinct may have contributed to the very distance it sought to prevent. Kate, sensitive to nuance and emotional cues, could sense the withdrawal, interpreting it as a lack of support or a sign of uncertainty about their future together. The strain was further exacerbated by external pressures. Advisors, palace officials, and even media narratives subtly influenced the couple's dynamic. Every decision Kate made, from wardrobe choices to public speeches, was evaluated not only for style or substance, but for its political and social implications. William, too, had to navigate the fine line between supporting his wife and adhering to the expectations imposed by Charles and the wider institution. These intersecting pressures created a delicate balancing act, one that grew increasingly difficult to maintain as time went on. One particularly revealing incident occurred during a royal tour. Kate, ever the consummate professional, was expected to engage with local communities, charities, and dignitaries, all while maintaining composure and charm. On one occasion, a small misunderstanding led to a public misstep. A minor scheduling conflict resulted in a delayed appearance, which the media quickly turned into a story of tension and discord. While seemingly trivial, these moments were emblematic of the underlying friction, illustrating how even the smallest miscommunication could be magnified under the relentless gaze of the public eye. Observers note that these early fractures were often compounded by subtle but persistent differences in temperament. William, pragmatic and reserved, approached challenges with caution and deliberation. Kate, dynamic and empathetic, often sought connection and understanding. While these traits complemented each other in many ways, they also created points of friction. In moments of high stress, the divergence in their approaches became more pronounced, leading to misunderstandings and emotional strain. What might have been resolved easily in a private setting was often amplified by the ever-present scrutiny of aides, advisors, and the media. At the same time, the couple's personal ambitions and philanthropic endeavors, while admirable, introduced another layer of complexity. Kate, deeply committed to charitable work, sometimes felt that her efforts were undervalued or overshadowed by William's engagements or the expectations of the monarchy. William, balancing his role as a father, heir, and public figure, sometimes struggled to provide the emotional support Kate needed. The resulting tension created a cycle in which both parties were simultaneously seeking connection and inadvertently driving each other further apart. The psychological toll of this environment cannot be understated. Sources close to the family describe Kate as experiencing moments of profound self-doubt. She questioned not only her suitability as a future queen, but also her ability to navigate the intricate social and political webs of the palace. The realization that her personal life was being scrutinized at every turn created a sense of vulnerability that few could imagine. It was not merely a matter of public opinion. It was an existential challenge to her identity and her sense of purpose. Meanwhile, William's internal struggle was equally complex. Torn between loyalty to his father, love for his wife, and responsibility to the crown, he found himself navigating an impossible moral landscape. His decisions were no longer guided solely by personal desire or affection, but by a complex calculus of duty, expectation, and consequence. The emotional weight of these decisions often manifested in private moments of tension, subtle withdrawal, and even disagreements over seemingly mundane issues that carried disproportionate significance. The stage was set for a dramatic turning point. The small cracks, persistent tensions, and unspoken disagreements had accumulated to a point where reconciliation seemed increasingly unlikely without significant intervention. Sources hint that the couple had reached a moment of quiet crisis, where private conversations turned into veiled confrontations and moments of intimacy were overshadowed by the looming presence of obligation and expectation. For Kate, the realization was painful. Her fairy tale marriage, long admired by the public, was showing signs of strain that could not be ignored. For William, the challenge was equally profound: how to reconcile his personal desires with the imperatives of monarchy, all while navigating the complex dynamics introduced by his father's influence. The cracks in the marriage were becoming impossible to ignore. What had started as subtle tension, furtive glances, misaligned schedules, minor misunderstandings, had begun to manifest in moments of outright conflict. Sources close to the family reveal that Kate increasingly felt as if she were performing a role rather than living her own life. Every smile at a gala, every carefully measured gesture in public, every perfect response to a reporter's question was weighed and reweighed for its political and emotional implications. Behind the poised exterior, a storm of self-doubt, frustration, and exhaustion was brewing. How much longer could she sustain the image of serenity when her personal world was in turmoil? One particularly revealing incident occurred during a family retreat at Amber Hall. The royal estate, usually a place of relative privacy and respite, became the setting for an emotional confrontation. Kate reportedly approached William to discuss feelings of isolation and concern about her role in the monarchy. She expressed a desire for clarity, for open communication, for partnership. Not just in the public eye, but in the private moments that truly defined a marriage. William, under immense pressure to reconcile his personal emotions with the expectations of the crown and the influence of his father, struggled to respond. Instead of the comforting dialogue Kate had hoped for, the conversation reportedly ended with tension unresolved and emotions left raw. Palace aides describe a pattern. The more Kate tried to communicate her needs, the more William became cautious, sometimes withdrawing emotionally to avoid further complications. This withdrawal, while protective in intent, only deepened Kate's feelings of alienation. She began confiding in close friends and advisors about her fear of being judged unfit, not just by the public, but by the very institution she had devoted herself to. Her identity as a compassionate, intelligent, and capable royal was being tested in ways that no fairy tale could have predicted. What made the situation even more complex were the constant comparisons to previous generations of royals. William, acutely aware of the public narrative surrounding his parents, Diana and Charles, carried a legacy of caution, sensitivity, and fear of repeating past mistakes. This awareness often influenced his responses, sometimes creating emotional distance where connection was needed most. For Kate, this historical shadow was heavy. She was not just living her own marriage. She was navigating the echoes of decades-old stories, expectations, and judgments. At the same time, external pressures mounted. Media scrutiny intensified as subtle signs of strain were noticed and magnified. Rumors, often baseless yet widely circulated, added another layer of stress. Social media, with its instant feedback and relentless commentary, became a pressure cooker of public opinion. Kate, while resilient, was human, and even the strongest composure has limits. The combination of private tension and public scrutiny created an emotional environment that was increasingly difficult to navigate. Even more concerning were whispers of internal palace divisions. Advisors, confidants, and aides sometimes had conflicting loyalties, further complicating communication and trust. Kate reportedly struggled to discern which voices offered genuine guidance and which were strategically positioned to influence outcomes in favor of certain agendas. William, too, faced conflicting advice, balancing the desires of his father, the expectations of the monarchy, and his own feelings. In this intricate web of influence, trust became a scarce commodity. Amid these mounting pressures, the couple's public appearances began to reveal subtle but telling signs. Observers noted fleeting expressions of frustration, small gestures of avoidance, and moments of apparent disconnect. The world, accustomed to seeing the polished image of a royal couple in harmony, was beginning to notice cracks. The public's perception of unity was being challenged by subtle realities that few had access to but many could intuitively sense. Emotional insiders recount a particularly poignant scene during a high-profile engagement. Kate, tasked with addressing a gathering of international dignitaries, delivered a flawless speech, her poise and elegance unquestionable. Yet, after the applause faded, she reportedly sought solace in a quiet corner, visibly shaken and reflecting on the personal cost of maintaining such composure. William, observing from a distance, was aware of her struggle but constrained by the unspoken rules of protocol, unable to offer public comfort. The moment highlighted the paradox of royal life. Appearances must be flawless, even when hearts are fractured. The tension between private needs and public expectations was reaching a tipping point. Kate's identity and sense of purpose were being questioned in subtle, pervasive ways. She was not just a wife. She was a symbol, a future queen, a public figure, and a person with emotional needs. Balancing these roles under intense scrutiny created a psychological and emotional strain that few could withstand. The fairy tale that the public had admired was being challenged not by scandal or betrayal, but by the relentless pressures of duty, expectation, and unspoken judgment. Adding to the complexity was William's struggle with his own emotions. As the future king, he had been groomed to prioritize duty over personal desire. Yet, the personal stakes, the love for his wife, the loyalty to his family, the responsibility to the institution, created an emotional tug-of-war. Sources suggest that William's moments of withdrawal were not signs of indifference, but of internal conflict, attempts to navigate impossible choices with measured care. However, the unintended consequence was a growing distance that Kate increasingly felt acutely. By the end of this period, it was clear that the fairy tale image presented to the public was no longer sustainable. The couple's relationship, while still grounded in love and respect, was under immense strain, exacerbated by the weight of history, the expectations of monarchy, and the scrutiny of the world. Kate, who had long been admired for her grace and intelligence, faced a personal reckoning. How to reconcile her public role with her private needs. William, equally burdened, confronted the challenge of balancing duty with personal loyalty. The stage was set for a pivotal moment. A decision that would not only affect the couple's future, but reverberate throughout the monarchy and the public consciousness. The tension that had been building for years, manifesting in subtle cracks and private struggles, was approaching a breaking point. What would happen when personal desire collided with institutional obligation? How would Kate respond to the growing pressure? And how would William navigate the impossible terrain between love and duty? Could a father's influence truly determine the fate of a marriage? In the world of royalty, power and family are rarely separate, and for William and Kate, that reality was about to collide with devastating force. Charles, now the reigning monarch, had long been known for his strategic mind, meticulous planning, and, some say, unyielding vision for the future of the monarchy. What few outside the palace walls understood, however, was just how deeply he involved himself in the private lives of his children, especially when he believed the stability of the crown was at stake. And Kate Middleton had just become a central figure in a plan she never even knew existed. From the outset, Charles's relationship with William had been layered, complicated, and often tense. As a son who had witnessed the turmoil of his parents' marriage, William carried both caution and sensitivity, careful not to repeat mistakes while remaining loyal to his father. But Charles, now armed with absolute authority as king, was unafraid to assert his vision, even if it meant influencing the intimate choices of his heirs. According to palace insiders, he had quietly evaluated Kate for years, observing not just her public persona, but her private demeanor, her interactions with William, and her ability to navigate the pressures of royalty. This evaluation, while never officially acknowledged, had reportedly grown increasingly critical over time. Sources claim that Charles's concerns were not limited to personality or capability. He assessed her emotional intelligence, her political awareness, and her potential to influence William in ways that could either strengthen or destabilize the monarchy. Every event Kate attended, every speech she gave, every charitable initiative she launched was under a subtle but persistent scrutiny. Even when praised publicly, she could still face private criticism from the highest authority in the land. What makes this revelation even more startling is the extent to which Charles's personal judgments could affect decisions about Kate's future. Unlike a typical parent, his authority extended beyond family council. As king, his opinions carried the weight of institutional power. To be deemed unfit was not a casual critique. It was a verdict that could alter the trajectory of one's life and legacy. William, aware of this influence, had long navigated the delicate balance between loyalty to his father and his commitment to his wife. But the tension was reaching a crescendo, and the scales were about to tip in ways no one could have predicted. Whispers of this hidden agenda began to surface through palace insiders, though they were carefully couched in secrecy. Sources suggest that Charles had identified several traits in Kate that he considered potential obstacles to her role as queen. These included her assertiveness in certain decisions, her desire for autonomy, and what he perceived as moments of emotional impulsivity. While many of these characteristics were natural, human, and even admirable, within the rigid expectations of monarchy they were interpreted differently, through the lens of duty, tradition, and strategic foresight. One particularly illuminating account comes from a confidential source who claims that Charles conducted private assessments not just of Kate, but of William's responses to her. These assessments reportedly included observing their interactions during family events, analyzing conversations, and consulting with trusted advisors about the couple's long-term compatibility. In essence, Charles was not only evaluating Kate, but testing William's capacity to manage both his personal attachments and his obligations to the crown. It was a psychological chess game with profound consequences. Charles's influence extended beyond observation. He reportedly began subtly shaping William's perceptions, planting seeds of doubt, and emphasizing the importance of certain traits he valued in a future queen. While never confrontational in public, Charles's approach was strategic, persuasive, and relentless. Insiders reveal that William, raised with respect for his father's wisdom and aware of the stakes of monarchy, often found himself swayed by these quiet manipulations, even when they conflicted with his instincts or feelings for Kate. The effects of this hidden agenda were profound. Kate, according to sources, began to sense subtle shifts in William's behavior. Small acts of withdrawal, hesitation in decision-making, and moments of indecision were not lost on her. She may have attributed these changes to stress, public scrutiny, or the natural ebbs and flows of marital life. Yet, in reality, they were often influenced by Charles's ongoing guidance, creating a complex web of tension that neither spouse fully understood. At the same time, Charles's strategy had another layer, the public narrative. While privately he scrutinized and critiqued, publicly he maintained a supportive and composed demeanor. This duality ensured that any action taken against Kate would appear measured, rational, and in the interest of the monarchy. By controlling both private counsel and public perception, Charles positioned himself as the ultimate arbiter of not just royal protocol, but of personal destinies. Insiders also hint at a particularly decisive moment, a meeting that reportedly took place in the quiet of the palace late one evening. In this private session, Charles allegedly communicated to William a clear stance regarding Kate's suitability as queen. He presented observations, evaluations, and warnings about potential risks, framing the discussion as one of duty and legacy rather than personal preference. William, already grappling with competing loyalties, was faced with a stark choice: align with his father's vision or assert his own authority and protect his marriage. This moment, according to confidential accounts, was pivotal. Sources describe William as appearing visibly torn, pacing the room, weighing the implications of every potential decision. The gravity of the situation was immense. A choice made in that room could redefine the monarchy, determine the course of a marriage, and alter the emotional and public lives of everyone involved. Kate, of course, was unaware of the full depth of this conversation, leaving her vulnerable to decisions that were being made without her knowledge, a reality that would soon have devastating consequences. But Charles's hidden agenda was not only about critique, it was about shaping the future. By influencing William's perception of Kate, guiding decisions subtly, and framing the narrative for public consumption, he positioned himself as both king and architect of the monarchy's next chapter. In his mind, this was not merely personal intervention, it was strategic foresight, a way to ensure stability, continuity, and the preservation of what he saw as the crown's dignity. Yet, the human cost, particularly for Kate, was immense. Emotional anguish, feelings of betrayal, and a growing sense of isolation were the unintended consequences of this careful orchestration. And the repercussions were about to intensify. Because what William decided in response to Charles's guidance would not remain private for long. The tension, the secrecy, and the subtle manipulation were building toward a dramatic tipping point, one that would challenge the very idea of love, duty, and loyalty within the royal family. The palace corridors had long been places where whispers carried weight, where subtle gestures could shift the balance of power, and where secrets had the potential to alter destinies. For William and Kate, this reality had become all too tangible. Charles's hidden agenda, carefully executed over years, had begun to shape not only William's perception of Kate, but also the trajectory of their marriage. What Kate did not yet know was how deeply these undercurrents had penetrated her personal life, and how soon they would culminate in a moment that would leave her world unrecognizable. Sources reveal that Charles had employed a strategy of quiet observation combined with selective guidance. Advisors close to the king report that he frequently provided William with carefully framed assessments of Kate's behavior, sometimes emphasizing potential flaws, other times highlighting instances that could be interpreted as shortcomings in judgment, diplomacy, or emotional fortitude. These discussions, though conducted in the language of duty and prudence, carried a weight that few could resist. William, trained from birth to value his father's counsel, found himself internalizing these assessments, questioning his own instincts, and reconsidering the solidity of his marriage in ways he had never imagined. Kate, naturally perceptive and sensitive, began to sense subtle shifts in William's behavior. Moments of hesitation, unusually measured responses, and emotional distance that had once been rare became increasingly common. Friends close to her describe long conversations where she expressed bewilderment and frustration, trying to understand why William seemed preoccupied or distracted. Yet the truth, the presence of Charles's strategic influence, remained hidden. It was as if an invisible hand was guiding decisions, creating friction, and shaping outcomes without her awareness. Adding another layer of complexity was the historical shadow of Charles's own marital history. William, acutely aware of the public's obsession with his parents' relationship, carried the lessons of the past with him. He feared repeating mistakes, feared public scrutiny, and feared emotional missteps that could echo in the media for decades. Charles's subtle interventions leveraged this fear, reinforcing caution, deliberation, and sometimes emotional withdrawal. The combination of inherited anxiety and strategic parental influence created a perfect storm of internal conflict for William, one that Kate could not easily navigate. At the same time, Charles reportedly maintained a carefully constructed public image. In private, he could exert influence, raise questions, and critique behavior. In public, he maintained a persona of support and impartiality, presenting a vision of unity and stability to the world. This duality meant that Kate, already under intense scrutiny, had little opportunity to discern where genuine approval ended and strategic manipulation began. Every compliment, every gesture, every meeting carried double meaning. The public saw encouragement. The private reality was calculated assessment. One particularly telling instance involved a high-stakes family event in London. Kate, poised and radiant, engaged in conversations with key members of the royal household, diplomats, and foreign dignitaries. Observers noted that Charles appeared unusually attentive to William's reactions, quietly signaling subtle cues, assessing body language, and noting interactions. The event, outwardly celebratory, became a microcosm of palace strategy, a test of patience, composure, and alignment with the crown's expectations. Kate performed flawlessly, as she always did. But the performance, though praised publicly, was privately dissected, analyzed, and critiqued, a pattern that had been repeating for years and that would soon reach a climax. The psychological impact on Kate cannot be overstated. Living under such scrutiny, with the added pressure of an unseen influence shaping her husband's perceptions, created a pervasive sense of tension. She was caught between the desire to be authentic and the need to meet the unspoken expectations of a monarchy that had already judged her in secret. Each success felt hollow when paired with private doubt. Each compliment from William felt tinged with caution. It was a delicate dance in which missteps could carry profound consequences. William himself was navigating an increasingly precarious position. The guidance from Charles, while framed as protective and strategic, forced William to confront his own values, priorities, and desires. He was torn between supporting his wife, honoring his father, and fulfilling the responsibilities of his future kingship. Each choice carried potential fallout, emotional strain, public scrutiny, and even political implications. This internal tension manifested in moments of indecision, withdrawal, and silence, further complicating the couple's private interactions. Sources indicate that the tipping point came in a late-night private meeting between Charles and William. In a room lined with portraits of monarchs past, the king reportedly presented a series of observations regarding Kate's suitability as a future queen. These were not casual remarks, but a structured evaluation. Traits observed over years, potential challenges identified, and warnings about how perceived weaknesses could impact the monarchy. William listened, weighed, and contemplated. The gravity of the moment was immense, and the pressure to make the right choice weighed heavily on him. Kate, still unaware of this decisive discussion, continued to navigate her own emotional landscape. Friends recount long walks, tearful conversations, and moments of quiet reflection in which she questioned her place, her role, and her future. The disconnect between public admiration and private struggle became increasingly stark. Each day, the invisible presence of Charles's influence shaped her reality, and each decision William made under that influence began to subtly redefine the trajectory of their marriage. Meanwhile, palace staff observed a change in the atmosphere of family interactions. What had once been moments of relaxed conversation and casual laughter grew increasingly formal, measured, and laden with subtext. Advisors note that Charles's influence extended beyond the immediate family, subtly affecting staff behavior, reinforcing narratives, and shaping the overall environment. Kate found herself navigating not just her husband's behavior, but the complex web of palace expectations and the unseen hand of the king himself. By now, the stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. The years of subtle observation, quiet guidance, and strategic influence were approaching a breaking point. Kate's perception of her marriage, William's internal conflict, and Charles's hidden agenda were all converging toward a moment that would redefine the future of the monarchy. What had once been manageable tension was now an imminent crisis, poised to erupt in a way that would shock the public and alter the lives of all involved. And yet, even as the first signs of the coming storm became visible, Kate had no idea just how decisive Charles's influence had already become. She could not see the subtle threads of strategy woven through her husband's decisions, nor could she anticipate the declaration that would soon turn her life upside down. What does it truly mean to be declared unfit by a king? For Kate Middleton, those two words would come to define one of the most dramatic and devastating moments of her life. Until that day, the world had seen her as the epitome of composure, intelligence, and modern royalty, a future queen in every sense of the word. Yet, in the quiet, hushed halls of Buckingham Palace, a decision was made that would shatter not only her marriage but her public image, sending shockwaves through the royal family and the global media alike. The lead-up to the declaration had been subtle, almost imperceptible to those outside the inner circle. Charles, having meticulously observed Kate over the years, had cultivated an opinion shaped by a combination of protocol, precedent, and personal judgment. Observers suggest that the king's assessment extended beyond Kate's public appearances or charitable work. He reportedly analyzed her emotional resilience, her influence over William, her adaptability to royal duties, and even the potential for her decisions to clash with the long-term strategic vision of the monarchy. The result of this careful scrutiny, a verdict that Kate was, in his eyes, not fully suited to the role she was being groomed to occupy. William, already burdened by years of private tension and the weight of his own loyalties, was the messenger and the enforcer of this verdict. Sources close to the couple indicate that he was summoned to a private audience with Charles, in which the king's evaluation of Kate was laid bare. Charles's words were reportedly deliberate, precise, and heavy with authority. He outlined perceived weaknesses, highlighted potential risks to the monarchy, and framed the discussion as a matter of duty, legacy, and national interest. For William, the confrontation was agonizing. His love for Kate conflicted with his instinct to obey his father and prioritize the stability of the crown. The emotional tightrope he was forced to walk was harrowing. For Kate, the world would only begin to understand the impact of this declaration after William conveyed its essence. The conversations, initially private, reportedly left her in shock, struggling to reconcile the public image she had cultivated with the private judgment imposed upon her. Friends describe her as stunned, tearful, and grappling with disbelief. How could a man she trusted, guided by duty and love, communicate that she was deemed unfit for the very role she had worked toward for years? The psychological and emotional toll was immediate and profound. Palace insiders reveal that the term unfit was not used casually. In the context of monarchy, it carried implications beyond personal judgment. It suggested a potential threat to the stability of the institution, a questioning of capability, and, implicitly, a warning that her continued presence in the role could have long-term consequences. To be branded in this way by the king was more than a personal blow. It was a public and symbolic challenge to her position, her identity, and her future. What makes this moment particularly shocking is that Kate's public persona had long exemplified the qualities traditionally celebrated in royalty. She was intelligent, articulate, poised, and empathetic. She had cultivated relationships with dignitaries, diplomats, and charitable organizations with care and diligence. Yet, behind the polished public veneer, private assessments painted a different picture. One that Kate could not have anticipated. and one that left her questioning every aspect of her identity and purpose within the royal framework. The impact on William was equally dramatic. Sources describe him as conflicted, pacing the palace halls, oscillating between loyalty to his father and his love for his wife. The declaration forced him to confront questions that had haunted him for years. Could he honor his duty as future king without compromising his personal life? Was it possible to reconcile his own desires with the expectations imposed by the crown? And, most painfully, could he maintain a marriage under the shadow of a verdict that implied his wife was fundamentally unsuitable for the life they were building together? The immediate aftermath was emotionally charged. Kate reportedly withdrew from public engagements for a period, seeking solace and guidance from close confidants. Friends describe long nights filled with tears, self-reflection, and private conversations in which she questioned not only her role as a royal, but her very identity. For someone who had navigated years of scrutiny with grace and resilience, the declaration represented an unprecedented emotional upheaval. Adding complexity to the situation was the inevitable public speculation. Even before official statements could be released, whispers circulated among palace staff, advisors, and media contacts. The anticipation of public reaction heightened the emotional stakes, turning private pain into a matter of national and international intrigue. Kate, already grappling with feelings of betrayal and isolation, now faced the daunting task of preparing for a world that would soon question her suitability and her place in history. Insiders also hint at a particularly dramatic conversation between William and Kate following the declaration. The Duke, caught between loyalty and love, reportedly tried to frame the situation in terms of duty and the larger picture of monarchy. He emphasized the importance of stability, the weight of responsibility, and the inevitability of difficult choices. For Kate, these words, while intended to reassure, may have compounded the sense of isolation and helplessness. She understood the stakes, yet she could not help but feel the personal sting of judgment, a judgment that had bypassed her voice entirely. The declaration also sparked a chain reaction within the palace hierarchy. Advisors, aides, and staff were suddenly navigating a new reality in which the future queen's perceived suitability was under question. Meetings, protocols, and communications were subtly adjusted. Every interaction with Kate, every briefing, every public engagement was now filtered through the lens of this verdict. The ripple effects of Charles's judgment were immediate, far-reaching, and deeply personal. As the days unfolded, Kate's inner circle observed her grappling with an impossible dilemma: how to maintain composure, dignity, and influence while reconciling with a declaration that questioned her very capability to fulfill her role. Emotional support became critical, yet even allies had limited insight into the intricacies of the palace dynamics and the extent of Charles's influence over William. For Kate, the challenge was not just surviving public scrutiny. It was navigating a labyrinth of personal judgment, family expectation, and institutional pressure that few could comprehend. By now, the stage was set for a dramatic escalation. The declaration had shifted the dynamics of the marriage, placing an unspoken yet palpable tension between Kate and William. It had elevated the stakes of every decision, interaction, and public appearance. The once celebrated fairy tale relationship was now under siege from forces both visible and invisible, and the world was on the verge of witnessing a crisis that would challenge the very idea of modern royalty. And yet, even as the declaration reverberated through the palace, Kate could not foresee the next move, the decision that would change everything and push her life, her marriage, and the monarchy itself into uncharted territory. The full weight of the declaration began to settle like a shadow over Kate's life. Suddenly, every glance, every smile, every carefully crafted public appearance carried an unspoken question. Could she truly meet the expectations of a role she had once dreamed of with confidence? The declaration had shifted her reality from one of admiration and accomplishment to one of scrutiny, self-doubt, and uncertainty. And for William, the tension between love and duty had reached a fever pitch, leaving both parties navigating a landscape filled with emotional landmines. In private, Kate reportedly struggled to reconcile her identity with the verdict she had been indirectly given. Friends recall long, tearful conversations where she wrestled with questions that were impossible to answer. Had she truly failed in some way? Were her efforts to connect, to serve, and to support the monarchy insufficient? And perhaps most painfully, could she salvage a marriage that now carried the weight of judgment from both her husband and the king himself? The emotional toll was immense. For someone who had spent years cultivating grace under pressure, this was an entirely new level of challenge. Meanwhile, William was caught in an internal conflict of unprecedented proportions. Sources close to the palace describe him pacing rooms late into the night, agonizing over the implications of Charles's judgment. His love for Kate was unwavering, yet he could not ignore the weight of his father's opinion, or the duty he felt to the monarchy. Advisors report that William repeatedly questioned whether his marriage could survive the intersection of personal desire and institutional obligation. Each day became a delicate negotiation between loyalty, affection, and strategy. The ripple effects of the declaration extended far beyond the couple's private life. Within the palace, staff and advisors began adjusting protocols, preparing for contingencies, and subtly altering interactions with Kate. Meetings that had once been routine were now scrutinized for signs of alignment or discord. Every conversation, every gesture, every public appearance was filtered through the lens of perceived unfitness. For Kate, the invisible pressures multiplied, creating an environment that was both professionally demanding and emotionally isolating. Friends close to Kate also reveal that she began to take stock of her own support network. Allies and charity organizations, longtime friends, and confidants became her lifeline as she sought reassurance and perspective. Yet even these relationships were complicated by the ever-present gaze of palace scrutiny. Trust had become a precious commodity, and Kate had to navigate a maze of alliances, loyalties, and hidden agendas, all while processing the emotional sting of the declaration. Adding fuel to the fire was the inevitability of public speculation. Even before any official statement could be made, the rumor mill churned with insinuations, leaks, and commentary. Journalists, eager for insight into the royal family's private affairs, interpreted small gestures and appearances as confirmation of internal conflict. For Kate, the combination of private anguish and public scrutiny created a relentless pressure cooker, leaving her little room to breathe, reflect, or strategize. At the center of this storm was the growing strain in her marriage. The once solid partnership she shared with William had been destabilized by an external judgment that she could neither control nor fully comprehend. Sources describe moments of quiet confrontation, where she sought answers from her husband, only to encounter measured, careful responses that left the questions unresolved. William, striving to balance loyalty, love, and duty, often retreated into silence, leaving Kate to navigate the emotional landscape largely on her own. It was during this period of intense emotional turmoil that the first serious cracks in their marriage became publicly visible. Observers noticed a subtle but undeniable shift in the couple's interactions at events, ceremonies, and official engagements. A smile that once appeared spontaneous now seemed strained. A gesture of support seemed calculated. A conversation caught on camera revealed fleeting tension that fueled speculation. While the public could not grasp the full context, insiders understood that these were signals of a marriage under siege. Some sources suggest that Kate, facing both private judgment and public scrutiny, began to consider her options carefully. How could she preserve her dignity, maintain her influence, and protect her family while navigating a verdict that implied she was fundamentally unsuited for her role? Every decision carried enormous weight, and every move was magnified by the presence of advisors, staff, and an ever-watchful media. The pressure was relentless, and the path forward appeared increasingly uncertain. As these dynamics played out, William faced his own personal reckoning. The tension between his love for Kate and the counsel of his father intensified daily. Each private moment, each decision about their family, and each public engagement became a test of his ability to reconcile conflicting priorities. Reports indicate that he struggled to find balance, knowing that every choice could have lasting consequences for both his marriage and the monarchy itself. Then came the first unmistakable signs that the declaration would not remain abstract. Sources report that private conversations between William and Kate began to shift from attempts at reassurance to discussions of possible separation. The realization that Charles's judgment could, and would, influence the course of their marriage added urgency and gravity to these conversations. Kate, once confident in her ability to navigate palace life and her relationship with William, now faced the stark reality that forces beyond her control were shaping her destiny. By the end of this period, the atmosphere within the palace had transformed. What had been a quietly tense marriage now teetered on the edge of a public crisis. Kate, emotionally raw and uncertain, and William, conflicted and pressured, were navigating a delicate balance that could tip at any moment. The declaration of unfitness had not only challenged Kate's role in the monarchy, it had fundamentally altered the dynamics of their relationship, creating a scenario in which a dramatic and irreversible decision was looming. And as the royal family prepared for what many insiders would later describe as the most shocking announcement in decades, Kate had no idea that her life, her marriage, and her public identity were about to be rewritten entirely. What do you do when love collides with duty in the most public and unforgiving arena in the world? For William, the answer would come in the form of an ultimatum, a decision that would forever change his marriage to Kate and send shockwaves through the monarchy. By this point, the tension between his loyalty to his father and his devotion to his wife had reached an unbearable peak. The declaration of Kate's unfitness had already left deep emotional scars, but now William faced the impossible task of translating that judgment into action. Sources close to the palace reveal that William wrestled with this decision privately for weeks. His friends describe countless nights spent pacing his private chambers, staring out over the sprawling gardens of Kensington Palace, and questioning the very foundations of his life. The weight of expectation, the legacy of monarchy, and the pressure to align with Charles's vision created a psychological storm that left him emotionally exhausted. He knew that any choice carried profound consequences, not just for Kate, but for the institution he was preparing to inherit, for his children, and for the public who had long idealized their relationship. The ultimatum reportedly emerged during a series of private, highly charged conversations with Kate. In these moments, William attempted to communicate the stakes without shattering the fragile remnants of their bond. According to insiders, he framed the discussion as a matter of duty and inevitability, emphasizing the consequences of ignoring the king's judgment. Kate, shocked and heartbroken, struggled to comprehend the reality of the situation. The ultimatum was not a suggestion, nor a plea. It was a stark delineation: comply with the expectations of the crown, or face the dissolution of their marriage. Kate's reaction, sources reveal, was one of profound disbelief. She reportedly sat in silence, absorbing the words that transformed her understanding of both her husband and her future. The woman who had once been celebrated for grace under pressure found herself confronting the unthinkable, that the love she believed to be unconditional was now intertwined with obligations, influence, and unspoken hierarchies she could neither control nor challenge. Tears flowed freely, and for the first time, Kate reportedly questioned not only her role in the monarchy, but her ability to survive its emotional and political minefield. Insiders describe a tense back and forth, with Kate pleading for understanding, for compromise, and for recognition of her years of dedication to both her marriage and the monarchy. William, caught between affection and duty, was reportedly unable to offer the reassurance she sought. His love was genuine, but the ultimatum was framed not as a personal attack, but as an unavoidable intersection of responsibility, legacy, and loyalty to his father. The clash of personal desire and royal obligation had reached a boiling point, leaving both parties emotionally vulnerable. The palace environment amplified this tension. Advisors, staff, and even the corridors themselves seemed to echo with expectation and pressure. Every private conversation, every walk in the gardens, every glance across the table was charged with significance. Friends close to Kate recall that she became increasingly aware of invisible eyes watching her, evaluating her reactions, and reporting them to unseen sources of influence. The realization that her life was being orchestrated by forces beyond her control added to her sense of isolation and despair. Adding another layer of complexity was William's own internal struggle. Observers suggest that he felt an acute sense of guilt, recognizing the pain the ultimatum would cause while simultaneously fearing the consequences of defiance. The psychological toll was immense. How do you reconcile love for your spouse with the perceived duty to an institution that defines your identity and future? How do you navigate a world in which every action is scrutinized, every decision analyzed, and every misstep potentially amplified into scandal? William faced questions that had no easy answers, and each day added weight to a burden he could neither ignore nor fully articulate. According to insiders, the ultimatum also sparked a series of strategic calculations within the palace. Advisors and aides were reportedly instructed to prepare for multiple scenarios: a compliant resolution, a private separation, or a public announcement. Each path carried distinct consequences, and each was being carefully considered under the watchful eye of Charles. The influence of the king loomed over every decision, subtly but unmistakably guiding the outcome even as William wrestled with his own moral and emotional compass. Kate, for her part, reportedly tried to find solutions, compromises, and strategies to preserve